Sorry, you don't have to clap, it's fine. Matching again, Tobias. Thank you so much for joining us for the final panel or talk that we have at Het House anyway. Actually, it's the final one of the festival, isn't it? Yeah. I guess I wanted to kind of start by saying thank you so much for being on a really interesting journey for us. It's been the result of 2 years of our thinking on this festival, but for a number of years more than that on the actual product itself. And it's been a real privilege to be able to invite so many wonderful speakers and thinkers and artists and designers to come and share that with us. So it's really been very wonderful. So I'd like to thank everyone who's come along, and also the audience who've been so supportive with your questions and your thoughts and your ideas and your time. We do really appreciate that.
Now we're going to introduce Anab. So we've invited Anab Jain to do the closing keynote of the festival. For both of us, she's been an incredible influence on the way we've thought as creative people and as critics of the world around us. She has an infectious energy towards changing the future, which I think affects the people around her. And it's, you know, it was a natural choice to put her as the person that offers perhaps a somewhat optimistic vision, or a somewhat more powerful vision, I think, of what the future and technology could do for us. So, I mean, without any further ado, we're incredibly excited to welcome to the stage Anab Jain.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Impakt Festival. Oh. Hello. I'm scared of death, but not as scared as I used to be. From around the age of 10 to early teens, I collected in the archive of my head hundreds of my imagined deaths. Traveling in the train through the dark Indian desert, I would imagine a bullet penetrating through my head from outside. Or rushing through the chaotic Ahmedabad traffic, I would imagine the railway bridge falling on me. This is not part of my deck, this music. It was not like there was a dearth of imagery and mythologies where I grew up in India, which might have lent a helping hand to my rather vivid imagination. For instance, this 17th century cloth painting depicts 7 levels of Jain hell and various tortures suffered in them. The tortures of these hells are too brutal to describe, but involve all sorts of severed bodies, drinks of molten lead and copper, and shackles. And of course, we had a legendary ghost haunting the crossroads and the end of my road, which probably helped. Even though it would have been easy enough, I resisted the lure of religious spirituality and instead found my spiritual home in cinema, where I went to university. But we know that spiritual messages can be very powerful. There is a strong focus on religions because religion can be thought of as a cultural system of meaning that helps to solve problems of uncertainty, powerlessness, and scarcity that death creates, wrote Elizabeth McKinley in Aging and Spirituality Across Faiths and Cultures. Recently, I've been reflecting a fair bit on this, that how we do or don't acknowledge aging and death here in the West. I wonder if celebrating aging and acknowledging death, perhaps even ritualizing it, may help us embrace transience and temporariness, help us come to terms with the fact that our time is a finite resource and our place in what we relate to and use is finite. Somehow, it feels like we have created no capacity to deal with the finite. It feels like there's a hubris that we accept subconsciously, where linear, forward-moving growth seems like the natural and inevitable order of things. A bit like this painting by John Gass titled The Spirit of the Frontier in the 19th century. There's Columbia, the glowing heavenly woman in the center, moving west, carrying with her the innovative telegraph wire in her left hand, whilst wagons, then stagecoaches, then trains all move with her. This painting is almost a propaganda, iconic of how the Western expansion by Americans was seen as a glorious and righteous thing. In reality, however, it may not have been as just as this painting makes it seem. Today, growth is so intertwined with financial progress that the rate of growth is extolled in rather strange genetic metaphors, as if this sort of growth was part of the economy's DNA. An economy that is not growing or not growing fast enough is accordingly referred to as sluggish, or will be said to be facing headwinds, ones like insufficient consumer confidence and international trade imbalance, or even demographic changes. And because this narrative is so strong and desirable, we have created everything we possibly can to protect us from anything that feels even vaguely uncertain about the future. I'm a designer and a filmmaker, and I work with my partner John and my colleagues in our studio Superflux. We challenge this particular vision of the future. We start by acknowledging the fact that the future is not a fixed destination, but a constantly shifting and unfolding space of diverse potential. We are constantly looking out for weak signals, those murmurs of future potential. Then we trace those threads of potential out into the future, asking, what might it be like to live in that future? What might we see, hear, and even breathe? We then run experiments, build prototypes, make objects, creating counter-narratives that bring aspects of alternate, different futures to life, making them concrete and tangible, so we can really feel the impact of those future possibilities, here and now, get provoked, get angry, or buy into them. So we become active participants in creating a future that is open, plural, diverse, rather than certain, fixed, narrow, and reductive. One of the most recent projects we did was around climate change, called Mitigation of Shock. A reason why I couldn't be here earlier was because we were installing the show in Barcelona. In this project, we take extrapolations from current data, exploring a future where the Western world has moved from abundance to scarcity. We imagine living in a future city with repeated flooding, broken supply chains, economic instabilities, and periods with almost no food in supermarkets. What can we do to not just survive, but prosper in such a world? What food can we eat? To really get inside these questions, we have been doing live prototyping for the past 1 year, exploring what happens when food becomes a valuable resource, where home growing is no longer like artisanal stuff on your balcony, but essential as things are too volatile and uncertain. We imagine that a lot of our homes will need to become spaces for food production, and so we've been experimenting and building food computers from scratch, using the technique of fogponics, so just nutrient fog, not even water or soil, to grow things quickly. And we've been building them in the cheapest way possible, from salvaged, abandoned, and repurposed materials, turning today's waste into tomorrow's dinner. I'll give you a quick glimpse of the final documentation that's right now on in Barcelona, but we're still really trying to figure out the best way to share and disseminate it. Can I have sound? The installation transports you into a London flat, perhaps around 2050 or so, when my son will be around my age. At first glance, a seemingly comfortable living space designed for a world of automated living, global trade, and material abundance. But then on closer inspection, a realization that the apartment has been adapted to a future it was never meant to inhabit. Discarded newspapers, a radio show, and much more reflect the tensions of this new world. A smart panel constantly asks the fridge to buy milk. Amongst the detritus of now obsolete smart devices and designer goods lives a new reality formed by the impact of climate change. Recipes in the kitchen reflect the change in food production, storage, and consumption.
Regarding a new round of price hikes for grain, vegetables, and meat.
Experimental food production now occupies the space once given to relaxation, transforming the apartment into a space for growing and producing food. Resourcefully hacked consumer items, IKEA shelves, decorative fog makers, computer fans, programmable microcontrollers, plumbing supplies, and LED lamps. Fog oozing out of these contraptions, blinding purple light, the droning sounds of the water pipes, foxskin, mycelium-bearing fruit, in the blasted ruins of capitalism. Looking beyond, there lies a city, familiar yet alien.
Police are continuing to investigate.
This project is neither a prediction nor a render. We've actually built all of these food computers because we want to create one tangible experience of one possible future and bring it into the present. It's about getting into the space. Both physically inside the space feels freaky and terrifying, but also somehow hopeful. We did this project because of our frustration around the narratives constructed around climate change in popular media. Leaving aside the denialism, even those who don't deny, the language is either too scary or difficult to engage with, and oftentimes alienating. We have become numb to data and graphs in PowerPoint decks and news feeds. What does this mean to me? What does this mean to us in our everyday lives? How does it actually affect us? And when? And how might it? Such predictions and anticipatory warnings from climate researchers, data scientists, and economists collide with our lifestyles here in the West of excess and abundance we have grown to take for granted. We want to stop climate change, but we still drive everywhere, waste food, and leave the lights on. The implications of our contradictory behavior are unsettling and ominous. The Anonymous Manifesto describes this most common figural form, the most ubiquitous of all risk media, the graph. A crawling, continuous line running between the coordinate axes. It traces a trajectory through a scattering of dots. Wherever they cluster together, the line runs through them to mark the average pattern. The idea is to fit a general trend line that minimizes the variations of the actual empirical observations along it. Most observations or dots fall outside of this line, their overall spread underscoring the tenuousness of predictions. The important point here is that risk media forms must simplify and contain the empirical field in order to authorize our visualization of the future. And at this point, the geek in me took over, and of course I went down this rabbit hole of where these pictorial representations of data first started. Look at this beautiful thing created by William Fairplayer in 1820. This is probably the world's first bar chart, showing a simple but powerful thing. How much a quarter of a week costs over 3 centuries, shown both in shillings and the day's wages of a good mechanic. The cost in shillings goes up, presumably due to inflation, but the cost in wages goes down as workers' rights improve. He also invented the circle graph. Bloody beautiful. And hold your breath. Apparently, he dreamt up the pie chart. Though nobody knows quite how, this one is showing the statistical account of each state in the United States. And this is the last one, I promise, but I had to include this because this one especially responds to an increasing sense of acceleration and information overload that we associate with emergent modernity. Playfair's linear arithmetics of graphs scale economic life in monetary terms and in time units. The interesting thing is that the educated elite at the time didn't really buy into this because the idea was there was no rigor in that and there was no depth, there were no stories, etc. But for Playfair, seeing numerical data as geometric shapes reveals its significance more quickly, makes it easier to remember, and saves time for those of high rank or active business. And I think literature picked up on this trend. I've been reading this book, 2 Cheers for Anarchism by James C. Scott, and this particular bit about the Charles Dickens novel Hard Times struck a chord. The book surveys English society and satirizes the social and economic conditions of the era. Here's an excerpt from the book. Louisa had been overheard to begin a conversation with her brother one day by saying, "Tom, I wonder. upon which Mr. Gradgrin, who was the person overhearing, stepped into the light and said, "Louisa, never wonder. By means of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, somehow settle everything, and never wonder." And so it was that period when Playfair's stunning visuals didn't really take off for a good few decades, though, until another William, this time William Stanley Jevons, came along. Jevons' work meant that economists strove for an apparently unified method of inquiry for the natural and social scientists. Statisticians in Britain abandoned their self-imposed injunction merely to report facts and moved to using data to make explanations. In the process, multiple causes which economists and statisticians have understood as contributing causes in the construction of particular historical events came to be seen as disturbing causes and were meant to be stripped away. This enabled more straightforward comparisons between the economics and natural sciences and was associated with the statistical analysis of graphical data. It was definitely a very interesting time in history, and it's important to understand this because this is what we've inherited, really. It was the heydays of the British, Dutch, French, and Portuguese colonial power. It was also the rise of what is now called growthism. And there comes in our third William, although 150 years later. This time, the physician and investment banker William Bernstein, whose book, The Birth of Plenty, How the Prosperity of the Modern World was Created, talks about this period. Bernstein explains how economic growth sprang to life after millennia of slumber, when we finally discovered property rights, scientific rationalism, capital markets, and fast and efficient communication. He talks about this unrelenting, never-ending engine, an economic perpetual motion machine showing no signs of fatigue, let alone stopping, and firmly believes that thanks to this machine, a century from now, the world will be a far more prosperous place, and 1,000 years hence, the Earth's inhabitants will judge the current century to have been an impoverished, cruel, and deprived dark age. By the 20th century, we had firmly and truly begun applying scientific laws and quantitative measurement to everything from economic problems to social problems, favoring facts, statistical data, and numerical measurements. Very useful, in no doubt about it. But again, as James C. Scott argues, the fact that these scientific modernists aspired to minimize the distortions of subjectivity and partisan politics to achieve what Laurent Daston has called an aperspectival objectivity, a view from nowhere. Vital questions that ought to be part of a vigorous democratic debate were put off the table, placing them in the hands of presumably neutral experts. The decisions made as a result would potentially affect the life chances of millions of people, depriving the public sphere of what legitimately belongs to them. But what this also made clear was that collection and analyzing citizens' data was legitimized. These numerical measurements allowed theorists to see the patterns in data, giving birth to the probability practice. And so here we have, one model of probability predictions. I work as a consultancy. We often work with clients who want to future-proof their business, who want to tell us what the customers will think and behave like, say, in 2050. And so a lot of them use this thing called the agent-based models, which are kind of simulations of several operations and interactions of multiple agents, but in a controlled environment. A key notion of this model is that simple behavioral rules generate complex behavior. This principle, known as KISS, keep it simple, stupid, reportedly coined by Kelly Johnson, lead engineer at the Lockheed Skunk Works, is extensively adopted in the modeling community. And a variant now used in marketing is keep it simple and straightforward. And so there we have the famous Gartner analytical ascendancy model, showing how we've moved from collection of data, every form of data, to leveraging that data through what we call data analytics, to move from operational reporting to predictive and prescriptive models. Our future determined, bundled up, sold off in optimized packaged instruments. As the authors of Speculate This Manifesto would argue, these instruments render firm the uncertain future, enclosing us within a relatively secure horizon, a firmament, as it were, seemingly fixed over the earth. And there's no ambiguity here about who and how the direct benefits affect, the narrative of growth around financial success. These are the figures that are being projected around this particular model of the future that we are all being subjected to. And of course, I had no problem in getting tons of them from, stock footage. These numerical renders, a bit like architectural renders, have become leitmotifs for reassurance, comfort, and security. That every uncertainty can be calculated and measured and become a knowable risk. Because the experience of uncertainty is, of course, uncomfortable. Deferred decision-making does not rank high in performance matrix, and there's an executive bias towards closure. The selection of a single assumption about the future on which to base a seemingly reliable course of actions. So this trajectory that I've shown so far is drawn from observations, not a deep thesis, and I don't want to suggest in any way a conclusive hard argument. But what I do want to suggest is that beyond this dashboard fetishism, this stuff is deeply political, from the techniques of calculation, in what to measure in the first place, in how to measure it, in what scale to use, in conventions of discounting and commensuration, in how observations are translated into numerical values, and in how these numerical values are used in decision making. And now, as we know, and I'm sure in the last few days you've heard enough about this, with automation and deep learning, the resolution of this game has gone infinitely higher. A whole new breed of automated, all-seeing machines and deep learning systems are constantly targeting, tracking, quantifying what we do. These predictive algorithms, again, tie into a very comfortable narrative, becoming intrinsic to our lives, affecting how we live, how we relate to each other, our intimacies, our biologies. I mean, I have just picked some very quick examples because, I mean, you've probably seen a lot of it, but for instance, simple thing in our home, like this Google camera, with its machine learning capabilities, can scan the environment and look for the right moment to capture. So it keeps taking tons of photos being uploaded on the cloud without you knowing till it says this might be the best one for you. Or this AI patrol borders. You walk through corridors at an airport, immersing yourself, admiring virtual fish, whilst your face is being detected and cross-referenced by AI, again, for your comfort and security. Or, of course, you know that predictive policing is actually starting to affect, reinforces stereotypes about certain neighborhoods. And a headline like, AI will soon identify protesters with their faces partly concealed. And we keep waiting. This is this game of waiting. What headline will come next? This game of waiting for what we do next, waiting for that future to happen to us. We've been exploring this stuff in different ways. A couple of years ago, we did this project called Drone Avery, where we used civilian drones as a sort of placeholder icon of how this kind of machine vision might manifest around us physically. We built several different drones to understand how they see the world from their point of view, what they interpret, and most importantly, what decisions they make about us from this unique vantage point. For instance, this is Night Watchman patrolling the streets. It constantly logs every resident of our neighborhood, logging the kids who play football in the no-ball game area, and marking them as statutory nuisances. And then see how it disperses this other group who are teenagers with the threat of an autonomously issued injunction. If we flip the point of view, we see ourselves playing with animojis or playing with our faces. If we flip again, we build this other drone called Madison, the advertising billboard, a giant floating disc. It looks at you, it understands what you like or don't like based on your facial expressions, and it does facial recognition. So for instance, if you were living in the city, its glaring presence would be so overpowering that you couldn't help stare at it. But it would feel like each time you look at it, it would know a little bit more about you. Like it would keep flashing all these adverts from Brian Air, as if it knew about the holiday you were planning. I'm not sure if you'd find this mildly entertaining or just entirely invasive. The trajectory of autonomy is moving beyond our own understanding. This is the latest thing from DeepMind, AlphaGo Zero, which uses reinforcement learning in a way that has never been used before. That is, it does not need any human data to make decisions. By not using human data or human expertise, we actually removed the constraints of human knowledge, says David Silver, the lead researcher at DeepMind. It's able to create knowledge for itself from first principles. What does this even mean? What lens can we apply to these things? The frames and references we have at the moment are not adequate, not anymore. As machines and other things begin to display increasing agency and autonomy, it's perhaps the right time to reflect on how we are extending our own, on what it might be to be more than human. But how do we even ever get a chance to do that? Because we are trapped in the snares of risk aversion, always feeling comfortable in knowing the unknown, the mundane voice-enabled device that you can always ask simple things and it will tell you the future. Just ask, will it rain, Alexa? Would I need an umbrella? The command and control thing gives us more data, asks more questions. Again, as I say, for your comforts, convenience, and security. But what if these machines had other dimensions, interactions, and personalities? How much control do we have over these interactions? What does it mean to trust such machines who take actions on our behalf, that they would be taken with competence and tact? We did little, I think you've probably seen the film. I'll just show you one clip of this film we did with Mozilla to look at some other variations of these smart machines. What happens when you try and ask a device, what might it do?
Setup complete.
Okay, Eddie, what's the weather forecast today?
What's your name?
It's Tom. Now, what's the weather forecast for today?
Why would you like to know this?
I need to know whether I'm going to take an umbrella.
Why would you need to carry an umbrella?
To stop me getting wet if it's pouring with rain. Turn on the lights, Eddie.
Which lights would you like turned on, Tom?
Turn on the hallway lights and the bathroom lights.
Okay, Tom. Why would you like these lights turned on?
Is this really necessary? Because I want to go to the toilet.
Okay, Tom.
Okay, Eddie. I'm going out now. Can you put the alarm on, please?
Okay, Tom. It's going to be pouring with rain later, so don't forget your umbrella.
Thanks, Eddie. Turn on the lights, Eddie.
Okay, Tom. Tom, did you know that excessive bathroom visits in the night could signify a prostate problem? Are you having any difficulties urinating? Okay, Tom. I've made an appointment with your doctor tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Don't worry about your meeting at 4 p.m. I brought it forward to 1 p.m.
Yeah, so it's what happens when it starts asking you questions you didn't expect, and where does control lie? Where does agency lie? We also want to think about this whole idea of devices and technologies being designed for this one-size-fits-all. Again, something inherited from the 20th century. Dare I say, a prison model? Make sure everything fit. Everyone uses the same kind of model. So this is I'll just show you a quick glimpse of a project where we looked at these kind of smart devices in our homes and imagine how some people might hack them. For instance, this is Thomas, who's age 70, and he lives on his own. His 3 children live away from him. They can't be either bothered or don't have the time to come and see him physically, so they send him these smart devices to make sure that they can see the data, that he eats healthy, he sleeps well, he walks enough, and all of that. He starts using them but finds it annoying, and so he stops using them, the dad, But then the kids don't receive any data, and so they start nagging the dad, what are you doing? Why are you not using these things? And so he starts looking for ways to outsmart the devices, and I'll just show you how he manages to do that.
00 GMT. Cow in sea area Shannon moving slowly eastwards and filling. Sorry, that should be low in sea area Shannon. And now the area reports. Viking, northward Sierra, southward Sierra, rain at times, good. Westerly becoming cyclonic, good. Humber, Thames, Bedford, Leyland, Daff, Dover, Seoul, Haight, rain at times, good. White, Portland, Plymouth.
Now, subway systems from around the world. Will you either tell us in which city systems, please? Best of luck. Okay, let's reveal our 5 subway systems, and here we've got. That made you think Paris. New York City from Andy and Julia. 50. David and Rachel are going to say. Is it going to be 15? No, 2 and 7. Very well done indeed. So yes, I could make this at so many films and what have you, isn't it? Now, A is London.
Shink of light getting inside the telescope. The astronauts had to get the latch to lock.
If you copy, Jeff's just working, putting the doors back together and thinks he needs to close the gap. And we're going to press on. If you've got a way to do it, do it.
Trap and a ratchet. Floating Story Musgrave improvised a solution. It was a success. The astronauts were elated.
This is again because of the vision of the future that is being sold to us, is that this is how the technology will be used. We as users, end users, consumers, imbue technology with the ideals of the people who have created it rather than those who use it. But creators and marketers can only ever suggest 1 or 2 uses. Technology's true impact will always be defined by those who use it in the end. Whether it's knitting groups or fascist regimes, technology becomes an amplifier and accelerator of the social, cultural, and political values of the groups who use it, not those who make it. And this is seen in some of the most mundane things. I have a little short story to tell about my own childhood when I was growing up in the most mundane way. Back in Ahmedabad in India, I remember when my parents bought their first washing machine in the late 80s. This was meant to revolutionize our lives. We were overjoyed, despite the fact that living in a desert-like city-state, water was always rationed. When the washing machine was just after 1 use, it took up most of the water we get for those 1.5 hours. And so after 1 use, we were back to our frantic mornings of rushing for showers, cooking, filling up every bucket and utensil in the house. My mom resumed the drudgery of warming up water in this big aluminum pot in the gas and carrying it precariously to the bathroom to soak the clothes every morning for 20 years. The washing machine was used as a wash basket to collect clothes that would be hand washed. We had a maid who observed this every day for 20 years and finally mustered the courage to ask my parents if she could take the washing machine to her house, as it was never used. My parents thought, oh great, we get all this space back. Yes, please take it. There it was used as a cupboard to store clothes. But the big family of 2 parents, 1 grandmother, and 5 children, it was not perhaps the most efficient cupboard. And so they decided to send it off to their extended family home in the village of northwest Gujarat. The village home was a 2-room mud and bamboo construction with uncles and aunts and cousins and several cows. The washing machine arrived on the back of this 3-wheeler and has been there since. It has a beautiful locally embroidered cloth over it and is used as a multi-purpose table. For instance, when you used to study, the kids sit on a low stool and stick their feet inside the washing machine hole. It just goes to show that the things that we've been sold are not necessarily, in the most mundane ways, not what we will end up doing. And these prescriptive models break at every level. There's only so much data we can use. And at a bigger scale, the predictive systems that are helping us forecast things are also hiding things from us in our lived realities, not preparing us for what is to come. And what is to come is deeply uncertain, deeply volatile. Recently, I went with my students on a field trip to the forests and the Alps of Austria. We are investigating the theme after abundance, looking at a post-Austrian future, post-climate change. As part of the trip, we met with some of the homeowners in the Rupak Valley near Sibratskofal, who gave us a guided tour of their homes. A short period of heavy precipitation and rapid melting of snow in the spring of 1999 initiated a catastrophic landslide. It was nauseating to walk inside the tilted house as the owner explained how the shift destroyed homes and moved many by over 700 meters to a kilometer. Property and insurance laws, the risk instruments that we have created, were not prepared as people found their homes in their neighbor's land. This challenges everything around insurance and property law. There are no instruments to deal with it. Insurance companies said they will cover the damages only once, even for properties that continue to move and crack. The geological shifts and melting glaciers mean they will keep moving. The locals made this sort of a lone, tilting metal cube on top of a mountain as a living memorial to the continuous landslip in the Alps. Some homeowners are fighting for lawmakers to create movable borders, while others want to build floating houses. This is also significantly, nobody died. This affected people's homes, of course, and emotionally traumatizing, but nobody died. Nothing compared to the insane climate change stories we're seeing around us. I experienced a tiny wee bit, very briefly, at the onset of Mumbai floods this summer. It's hard to describe in words what happens there. As the authors have speculated this right, risk discourses ironically provide a kind of organizing reassurance, a sense of relief in the face of burgeoning uncertainty. But the costs of that relief accrue elsewhere. For if risk materializes a managerial present to secure a future, it does so by systematically parceling or outsourcing actual risks to those less enfranchised. Risk perception, risk assessment, and risk management produce a globality that obscures those who die in drug trials or drone attacks, so that the privileged may enjoy the comforts of surplus life. Unless you are there, you will never know. Virtual reality will not help us understand what's going on. I'll just play a video of Mark Zuckerberg and his head of VR demoing their new VR tech.
All right, so now we are in a 360 video in Puerto Rico, and hold on a second, and you can kind of get a sense of we're on a bridge here. It's flooded. You can get a sense of some of the damage here that the hurricanes have done, and I mean, this is one of the things that's really magical about virtual reality is you can get the feeling that you're really in a place, right? I mean, I probably should have mentioned this before, but Rachel and I actually aren't even, I think, in the same building in the physical world here.
We're in
but
totally
I mean,
different places.
we're here. I mean, it feels like we're in the same place and we're making eye contact. We're talking to each other.
We can high five.
Yeah, there you go. High five. And
we can pretend to be cartoon characters and pretend to have fun in a disaster zone, creating a safe virtual world, disconnecting from the world and from what's going on outside, actually. Whether it's VR or such seductive design fictions or numerical renders, these are carefully constructed models of reality that are constantly presented to us in whatever instrumentalized or rendered form. These models have replaced the map for the territory, non-confrontational, flat, distance in form. These are toys used to soothe us, soothing us towards a bleedingly impossible future most of us will not find ourselves in. And this media stereotyping extends into political stereotyping as we try to model our worldviews into these molds. And these molds blindfold us, close down our ability to see things as they are. The live-action show that is unfolding, replacing it with a historical narrative that is always going to be at some level out of touch with the world around. We see and read the world and form opinions through these lenses. This is the manipulation of our models of reality. When we are surrounded by anxiety-inducing uncertainty and complex shit, we succumb to political stereotyping, attempting to align our worldviews into these predetermined ideological frameworks or models of reality. I'm using the term models of reality to refer to a modeling of reality that shapes our views and our perspectives, shapes how we act and feel, shapes how we relate to each other, and what we consider truth. For instance, neoliberalism is a modeling of reality. Communism is a modeling of reality. And I'd argue that these models of reality are almost like ghosts. They are figments of the past that are overlaid onto the present. The present isn't a replay of the past. It's just that we replay the past onto it. To the extent that we are stuck on these replays and are unable to see live what's going on. It strengthens the illusion that you know all the risks, you know what the future holds. But these sorts of idea complexes and calcified thinking leads us to believe certain things would never happen. But inevitably, our worldview breaks, and throughout history, we have examples of it. For instance, everyone told us to believe that we had moved beyond boom and bust, but then bang, it happened, the financial crisis, or the American presidential elections, or Brexit, or whatever's next. We run with our little filter bubble that tells us, but things are changing so quickly and rapidly that any rigid ideological frameworks will be quickly broken by the force of change. So how do we respond? What do we do? First of all, I think we need to let go of this desire to bundle the problem, to narrow the risk, to ideologically align, let go of this desperation for all certainty. As Luca Gatti writes, silver-haired, white males, well-aged, safe hands, at the end of the day and bottom line, blokes, steady, practical, rational, and slightly constipated, with an average culture and proudly lacking intellectual distinction, their minds engraved with experience and clogged up with platitudes, solid in their knowledge of one thing and absolute about its relevance, they are out. Perhaps another idea would be to be okay with being in the present, being present with the unknown, seeing the world as a process of unfolding. To not rush to make choices, decisions, comments, judgments, but instead be open, to reclaim ownership of the unknown. My friend Alex Taylor talks about the possibility space, a space that is open and expansive and exciting, and to explore this category of uncertainty. Political uncertainty, philosophical uncertainty, uncertainty of images, perhaps that's much closer to how the world is. Anna Singh writes beautifully about how thinking with precarity is to encounter a reopening of the imagination and a cultivation of curiosity. In her book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, on the possibility of life in capitalist ruins, she calls it the life without the promise of stability. She says, we are stuck with the problem of living despite economic and ecological ruination. Neither tales of progress nor of ruin tell us how to think about collaborative survival. It is time to pay attention to mushroom picking. Not that this will help save us, but it might open our imaginations. And that's when we can really perhaps start to speculate. When we are open and we are curious and we have a possibility space, we can start creating live prototypes and blueprints for many different alternate presents and futures, counter-narratives to disrupt the predominant paradigm. We need to argue for different worlds to those which dominate us, however small, wherever they might be, alternates that remain responsive to difference, to unanticipated contingencies. Responsive to change, taking responsibility for the future, being committed with depth and rigor. And to all those who lament that there's too much speculation, too much fiction, I argue there's not enough, not even remotely enough that makes it to the boardrooms of decision makers. Let these new, committed, and credible stories and counter-narratives enter the pitch decks, the annual reports, the boardrooms, the pubs, the dinner parties. The value of these counter-narratives isn't that they might outcompete or replace the dominant one, but that they create a space for thinking imaginatively. Otherwise, you're locked into a single world frame that isn't your own. As Ursula Le Guin says, sometimes the most direct way to tell the truth is to tell a totally implausible story, like a myth. That way you avoid the muddle of pretending the story ever happened, or ever will happen. The truth is a matter of imagination, and that's where our work lies. To render this imagination through words, pictures, images, stories, visions, telling the truth about the way we experience life and show the possible ways in which we could. The very fact that the current worldview requires infinite growth in a finite world demonstrates that it will collapse and die. We have no choice but to see outside of the current paradigm because it will fail. So the only question is, what will we birth in its place? I will leave you with this, which my friend Anne Galloway shared a while back. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Thank you.
Very tired.
There's the whiskey.
Yeah. It's good to end on that positive note. I was thinking as you were talking, actually, because you used words that were very familiar to me. About 4 years ago, I gave a not insignificant lecture called Haunted Machines, in which I speculated that the reason why we had this resurgence of narratives of myth, magic, and monsters was because we were just alienated from each other through complex systems. And I ended that talk with a quote by Anab Jain, which was that wars over autonomy and agency will be the leitmotif for the future. Is that where we are now?
Yeah, isn't it? I think we're living in that. Yeah, it's kind of hard to step out of it and see it and understand it. And I think, yeah, it is hard. But yes.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't bother trying.
I think we should keep trying.
So then the next question is these incredible, and this is the last question for me because we're short on time and I want to open up to as many people as possible. These incredible prefigurations you create, right? Like the mitigation of shock, which isn't just a speculation, it's a lived experiment. How do those translate into actual meaningful change for people who don't have the time to engage with these things, who don't have the time to think critically about their technologies or the world around them?
I mean, that is really our biggest challenge as well. And so over the last, I think maybe a few years, maybe a year, a couple of years, we're trying actively to engage with different kinds of publics. You know, so we work as a consultancy. We work with clients, and currently we're doing a lot of work with humanitarian organizations. And in every attempt, yes, we want to get out of the echo chamber, as Adam said. And yes, try and find, we don't know, we are trying, but I think we can't stop. I think that's the only thing, we can't stop. We are constantly, from when we started to today, we're just very keen to increase the resolution because the other resolution is getting really high. So we just have to increase the resolution and the quality and the quantity and the scale of our alternatives.
And I think, you know, Adam was calling for in his talk for someone to have the story, to have the big narrative. And what's come clear to me through this festival is actually there's just a multiplicity of people working in a huge range of different ways to try and change things. And whether that's like Angela interrogating spaces where difficult conversations have to happen, or you trying to envision these alternatives, or like Wesley Goatley who's trying to sort of critique the very mechanics of technology in order to understand the ideologies behind it. All these efforts seem like in a way they are a story. They are a story of people who are intellectually and mechanically and technically curious and engaged with the world. And I think that's something to be optimistic about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, everyone, I imagine a lot of people are artists and makers. And, you know, I think we have to create what is like a living catalogue of the other. We can't stop. We just have to find new ways and new mechanisms of disseminating and sharing. And, yeah.
Great. All right, we are very late and we are all very tired, and there is a bar on the other side of that wall. So I want to open it up to the stragglers. Who's left in the audience for any questions? There's a lot of stragglers, very committed stragglers. So anyone who may have a question for Anab quickly. Don't. Come on. Don't do that thing where, because what's going to happen afterwards is going to be 8 people queuing and...
I've taken up a lot of space. I'll try to make it quick. Thank you so much. I'm wondering about how to get, in that possibility space, the people that might have an interesting answer but systemically might not be able to be heard. Like how do we deal with that? The big question.
Yeah, I don't know is the honest answer. I really don't know. I also feel that it's okay to not know. And I don't think that it is necessarily mine or any artist or designer or creative responsibility to be able to do everything. Create the work and put it out there and also find means of disseminating. It's a big ask. And but you know, recently I gave a talk on a slightly big platform, and it's unbelievable the amount of people like have got back in just emails, random emails, like an accountant in South Africa or someone who's been held captive in Istanbul, and like people do engage, and it's just that we don't have a means of quantifying that. But if we do more of it and we amplify it, perhaps it will. Yeah.
Hopefully this won't be a downer question, so I'll caveat it that way. It's clear that a lot of the people that are working in this kind of space right now, this like space of the imaginary, in a very, very committed way, but I think that we're all aware that everybody is quite low on energy and the capacity is low, and putting all of this work in the context of climate change, you know that it's a long game. Like it's clearly multi-generational. Given that, what do you think are the most important considerations for individuals working in this space in order to be able to go the multi-generational path?
Individuals, like the people who are creating these experiences. Yeah, I mean, so one way is what we did with mitigation of shock, because we had people who actually came and walked. It wasn't virtual reality. Like they had to come in and experience that space and understand what it means. And I think to do more, you know, you see fire outside of your window and you could either close it or you can start looking at it and understanding what's going on. It's, I mean, we imagine this space to be around a time. It's not a prediction, but we imagine it to be a time when my 5-year-old son will be my age. And it's not that far off, you know, it's as far off as 1990s far behind, you know, it's not that. And this is what the project's trying to do, is bring that multi-generational thing. No, it's not my problem. I don't have children or whatever, why should I bother with it? Bring it into the present in whatever means we can, experientially, emotionally, provocatively, not just through graphs or whatever.
I think we've got time for one more question if it's quick and good. It better be good.
I can't guarantee that.
Work harder.
So, I mean, you talk about... I'll see you after the show. You talk about generating more and potentially rich narratives about the future. I mean, that is one way out. But there are an awful lot of other narratives and narrative forms being generated right now. So, and the difficulty then is how does someone who's not in this field of work distinguish between, you know, the fantasy narrative, the fandom narrative, the shiny future, the speculative future, and the substantive potential future? What are there characteristics, textures, approaches that can help distinguish that?
Yeah, I think there's a credibility and a commitment, and it from the outside might be at first glance difficult, but I actually think that if you increase again the number and quantity and quality of it, you might just be able to confuse and conquer. But I think people are smarter than we give them credit for. So actually, in so many occasions, I've spoken to so many people who are not from our echo chamber, like so many times, constantly, and they know when it's a render and when it's not. Like the other side, the fictional architectural render, what have you, has been around and has been we've co-opted into that so well that anything that's different will hopefully work. I mean, I'm here to end on an optimist note, right? So I'm going to say yes, do more.
All right, good work. You're done. Thanks. Thank you very much, Anab Jain. Join me in thanking Anab.